Okay. Right. We are on week 14. We are on day 4. And to follow up on what you all covered yesterday, which let's review real quick, was setting up the Wine API project and running through authentication. So you learned how to create a super user. Actually, it may not be the first time that you've done that, but you learned how there is a special built-in user account that you use to sign up a user, and you walk through getting a token using an API endpoint and a view. So with that token, you're able to sign in as the user, and if anyone had any trouble getting to the end result, you'll have more time to work on that today because what we're doing is more of the same, but with a Django, well, a front end for Django, not necessarily a Django front end. So we're going to be creating some HTML, some CSS. That's going to be very boilerplate. And then we'll be walking through writing some JSON that will give us the functionality we need to interact with the Django application. And we'll see how this allows us to make a connection between essentially two different systems. Even though they're both on your system, you're simulating two different machines essentially with these two different local addresses. And we are going to walk through how to set up middleware inside of Django so that we can do that, right? You've already come face to face with cores at one point. I think it was earlier, way earlier in the curriculum when you first went through HTML, I believe. And so just a brief refresher on what CORS is. It's essentially a protocol built into browsers to prevent communication, cross-origin communication, right? So CORS is really a security protocol. It allows for only authorized communication between two separate machines, right? And so we have to allow for that permission. And how we do that inside of Django is we set up a simple middleware. And this is straight from the Django documentation, and it's all we need to get going. So we're going to build a CORS middleware using the code from the Django documentation. And if we click on this, we could see more information on how that middleware works. But like I said, we have the code we need to run with our project today. So we make the class, we add it to our settings.py, and we expand on the class a bit. Notice here how we are specifying some responses to this call, right? This call is essentially the part of the middleware that allows us to interact with the request, almost like we're intercepting it, right? Because if you were to back up a bit, middleware is essentially really just a fancy way of saying code that runs in between the client and the server, uh, in the middle of like an HTTP or HTTP request and response. So this first part here, self.getResponse, we're writing that we want to get a response by passing in the request. For that response, we are setting a parameter, an access control allow origin, and we are using the wildcard to basically specify we want to allow access to all origins, right, regardless of where you are. So whatever address or port you're coming from, we are going to allow communication. And we will allow headers. We will allow certain methods. In this case, we want our basic CRUD functionality, right? So we have delete, post, and get and options. And if the request method happens to be options, then we give a response status code of 200. Okay, so simple enough so far, right? Let's see. You've already talked about a flow to basically a request flow. I think I saw. Yeah, we've seen this image before, right? You have a user that makes a request to sign up for uh, an application or a service, an API, whatever. And so they pass in their username and password to the sign up endpoint. That's what you all built out yesterday. And the API receives it. It'll create a new user, add it to the database, and it will associate with a token. And in order to get that token, you have to send another request, right? So you send a request to a different endpoint, the get token endpoint, and it sends that token back to you. And with that token, you can pass it in as an authorization header to further API requests. Basically, all the requests that are locked behind um, a user account. So the API will then check the validity of that token and it sends a response back. And to simulate all of this today, we, like I said, will have a very simple front end. So we got this boilerplate code, HTML. We don't have to do anything to change this. You can if you want. If you want to add on to this really bare bones HTML, by all means. Same with the styling. Apparently, I don't think y'all know Chad because he's a previous instructor, but apparently he asked ChatGPT for all this CSS. And then we have this starting point for our app.js, and together we'll talk through all of these functions one by one, and we'll demo what it looks like writing these out and interacting with Django as a result. Okay, so should be easy peasy. Your challenge today will be to essentially do the same thing. So you could get a head start if you set up a project and work along during this demonstration. But for the challenge, you'll get to choose any of the Django projects you've worked on so far and rebuild the same flow. Okay, any questions? Make sure I've got the chat available. Let's keep, there we go. Uh, where are we at? We want to, I'm going to load up VS Code, clean this up a bit. And let's take a look at what we have so far in Django. We have the Wines API. I do have it set up and ready to go. I've got my Docker container running using Docker Compose up. I've got list of containers. Yeah, here we could see that it's running. Where it is. Okay, and run server. So I've gotten my Django server running as well. And let's talk through what we saw inside of the README. Scroll back up. So the first thing that we talked about was setting up some middleware, right? That will be inside of our primary project directory. So in this case, for Wine's API, you all should have it set up and ready to go from a few days ago, I believe. And inside of our, what's wrong directory? Inside of our Wines directory, we create a new file called middleware. And it's essentially what we just saw inside of the README, right? So you could just copy paste that middleware code. It's very simple boilerplate code. We initialize the class. We write a call method. It's a special method, but we also pass in these values. This is where we would specify what what locations and destinations we want, right? In this case, we're going to stick with all. This is where you would pass in like the URL and port that you would normally use in a request. In this case, we could stick with a wildcard and we could leave all of this the same, really. What you'll also have to do, so aside from that, you'll have to go to your settings.py and you're going to add a few things. There's going to be, I think you already added this from Thursday, so you should already have REST framework, auth token. This is what we want to add to the middleware uh, array. You could add at the top, at the bottom, either or. You're going to write wines.middleware.course middleware, and this should be exactly the same thing that you have inside of your class. Okay. With that, I think that's all we've got to add. Let's just scroll through and double check. I think you added this last Thursday as well. 'Cause I don't think that's in here. Yeah. So we should still have everything the same as you had left off on Thursday. And once all of that is set up, then we can get started on the front end portion.
Question.
Sure.
Do you have anything extra in the accounts app folder? Because Thursday, Tiffany said you don't need to add it to the settings.py installed apps because it's just the authorization piece. So what is it called? Framework.auth that we added to installed apps in settings.py
Okay.
covers down on it.
Okay. Yeah. So this probably isn't necessary, right?
Right. I just want to know if you had anything extra in there that we're missing.
I don't think so because there is something in this README that I noticed. It says that it assumes you're using with course middleware branch on the Wines API, but I don't think, yeah, the branch didn't exist. So I did everything on the Thursday README to catch up. So I shouldn't have anything that you all don't have either.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, good call it though. Thanks for pointing that out. Um, let's see. So just double check. Yep, this should be everything. Yeah, the only things you'll need to add will be the middleware, the settings. Oh, it doesn't even say that in here, but yeah, I guess that setting the change you made to the settings were from Thursday then. Okay. Yeah, so add the middleware to the wines directory and then add it to the middleware configuration inside of the settings.py. Those should be the only two things. And once that's good to go and your project is up and running, so let's just double check that everything is up to speed here. We should be able to run some simple commands. So if I run a docker exec command with my SQL to request what's in the database, I could see I've got 3 entries inside of the wines database. So we're good to go there. Yeah, we should be good to go. Um, you should, yeah, you should be caught up. If you're not, I don't know, let me know. Maybe we could take a minute, but no one's saying anything, so I think we should all be good. So once you are at this point, you're going to create a new directory. And in that directory, we're going to copy over some of our boilerplate code. So let's see. I don't want to be there. Let's go to our wines front end. This is the directory that I'm creating. I'm just going to go ahead and remove everything in here. Okay.
This is going to be outside of the actual DRF Django REST framework API.
Yeah, it's going to be outside. So
Okay.
it's another app entirely.
And this is the front end app.
Yep,
Okay. So the middleware, just take so I can get my head straight. The middleware is going to be in between the front end app and then our DRF wine API basically to allow access from the front end to that DRF wine API.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, how it's set up in Django, it's pretty straightforward. Eventually, as you all land your jobs and start working with other languages, other frameworks, you'll see that the implementation of cores in a lot of different scenarios are very similar to this. Like really the key thing is you would be installing some kind of handler, some kind of middleware. So like, if you were working in Ruby, a Ruby Rails application, it would be a Ruby gem that works with CORS authentication. And you specify these 3 things really. Like these are the key things. You need to be able to specify which um, sources you want to allow to your server, and you want to specify the types of requests that you want to allow as well. So that part is fairly straightforward. You really just find the gem or package or boilerplate code that you'll need to specify these things, and you just set that up. You really shouldn't be running into any scenarios where you have to, well, I mean, I guess that depends on where you land, right? But if you land at like an existing company as opposed to like a startup, you shouldn't have to write any kind of code, any custom code to work with cores. There should be a lot of pre-existing solutions out there. Okay. We have a new front end. I might as well just remove this as well. So we've got a clean directory. What do? I'm going to make some files for my front end. So I'm going to make
Julie,
uh,
can I see
index.
your Explorer just so I make sure visually I'm putting these in the right place?
Mhm. Oh yeah, sure. Wait, one more time, Kim. You want to see the Explorer?
Open up your Explorer on your Visual Studio Code so I can visually see.
Oh,
Yeah, you're fine.
okay. This thing. Yeah.
That's what thank you.
hmm Okay, so let me scroll down then to where I should be. Wines front end. This is my directory. Let me collapse all this other stuff. Wait, I can't collapse that. Okay, wines front end. So I'm going to make an index.html, a styles.css, and an app.js. So, oh, I got to save these so they show up in the Explorer. This is our very simple front end. Let's go ahead and copy over some of that code.
Julius, can I ask another question? I'm sorry. So you had to do a start app to make a new app? Is that what you did? You're not just inserting files.
Oh, this is actually like yeah, no start app. This is going to be outside of the Django directory. So let me actually start fresh because I already had this folder and that's why probably wasn't clear what I did. Okay, so I got out of my Wines API directory, right? Like I'm no longer in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a new, like I'm building a new app from scratch right now, right? So I can name it whatever I want, but I'm gonna name it Wines front end. And now in my Wines front end, I'm going to start a front end project. So far, you haven't learned you haven't learned React. So we are going to make a super simple front end with the components that you've learned so far, and that's just making an index.html, a styles.css, your style sheet, and an app.js so that we could run some custom JavaScript code in our HTML. And I think it has been a while since you all worked with JavaScript and HTML, right? Like that was really early in the curriculum, I think. Yeah, I think it's been around 7 weeks since you've all touched this. So we have a lot of we have all the code you need ready for you, right? I think one of the reasons we don't spend too much time worrying about like writing this HTML or CSS out or even the JavaScript is because you just need like the bare bones minimum to understand what's going on. Like the key thing that we're trying to learn here today is the interaction between the front end and Django, and not so much writing a front end in JavaScript. Because when we get to React, you'll have the React framework to help you write a more robust front end. Okay. So with that, let's just talk through what we are going to be copy pasting. Our HTML file has a header and a body, essentially the two necessary components for any HTML file. The head is all metadata. It's not anything that you'll actually see inside of your window, right? You could have a title and that'll affect the tab in your browser, but everything that you see in the browser itself, the body, which again, just as a review, is rendered by the DOM. It's written in this syntax where you have opening tags, closing tags, and basically everything inside of these carets is an element that is rendered by the DOM, right? So we
Can I
have
ask you a question? It's hard to stop you, but this was not clear to me in the README, so I'm still trying to catch up with where you are.
Mhm.
Show me your Explorer again. So this is a whole new directory we're making,
Mhm.
basically equivalent to the account we've created so far, right? On the same level as that. And then it just has the files underneath it. It just has the 3 files. That's all it is. There's no directory inside of it or anything.
Exactly.
Okay.
You
Okay.
want me to try to clear it up a little bit, Kim, in terms of what we've learned?
Yeah, maybe. It's not in the README, so it takes
Right.
longer to kind of figure out what we're doing. Yeah.
Remember when we made that calculator app? We used CSS, HTML, and JavaScript.
Hmm.
That's basically what we're doing here. It's a standalone thing, and this is going to reach out to what we did last week or Thursday, sorry.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's a separate entity that eventually is going to show us is going to reach out to what we did on Thursday.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, and by all means, ask questions and let me know if I'm going too fast. So,
You just have a really good flow when you're talking, so I hate to interrupt you.
but don't be afraid to interrupt. Just go for it. Cool. All right, so here is our HTML. Again, these are all elements rendered by the DOM, and we'll see inside of the Explorer or a Dev Console how to interact with this, or how to a little more visually interact with this, I should say. But first, let's get started with actually getting this into our new front end application, right? So we're just going to copy all of this. I'm going to copy the entire thing. We don't need to write it out line by line. I'm going to paste it in my index.html and I'm going to save. So now I've got my first file. Let me make sure. Yep. On my first file, that's my index.html. I'm going to go ahead and close that now that it's good to go. We're going to do the same with the style sheet. Let me close all of this other stuff too, just so it's not cluttered. And actually, I'm going to leave the HTML here just so we know that we're working with these three files, right? So these are our three files. Our CSS is going to be the same. We're just going to copy paste the CSS because it's just really some basic boilerplate styling. Yeah, I don't know if I really need to go over style sheets so much, but just so we have some context, all of these blocks of styling are tied to an element inside of our HTML, right? So, for example, we can see that the H1, which styles the header, matches with the very first element inside of our body. So we know that this will apply to our header. This will apply to everything inside of the body, and then so on and so forth. We use these specific pointers, like things with a hashtag or a period, to point to the ID and class name elements inside of the HTML. We don't have any, I see we don't have any class names. So that's why we're seeing hashtags and not the period. If I don't, yeah. If I do a control F to search for get info, I could see that the H3 header has a get info ID. So that is the styling that is getting applied to this element. So that's essentially all the style sheet is. It specifies different styles when rendering these HTML elements. So now that we have that up, let's go ahead and get this into our app.js. OnLoad is the function that basically runs as soon as the Windows loads. And if we go back in our index.html, we'll see inside of the header that we are importing this app.js. And that's how this is working, right? So if I were to spin up this application right now, spin up, and I could do that with live server. Where is live server? Okay, to get to live server, right click on your HTML file, open it up with live server, and we have a very simple HTML. This is all the HTML inside of the index.html, right? So if we were to comment this out and save and refresh, all of it disappears. So I'm going to comment that back in. I'm going to save and refresh. Right now, none of this is going to do anything because we haven't actually built the functionality, right? HTML by itself isn't very powerful or robust, which is why we use JavaScript to add additional functionality. If you open up your dev consoles, you'll have access to windows like the application, um, the console itself for logging. And if we look inside of our console and we try to interact with this, so let's make, I don't know, garbage and hit the submit button, we'll see that nothing's even happening here, right? And that's because we don't have any functionality tied to any of this yet. So if we go to the submit button, what do we see? Yeah, really absolutely nothing. Like not even like any function calls or anything, right? So to build some functionality, let's start adding in some JavaScript. What our goal is with this front end is to have a user interface where the user can sign up and the user should be able to also sign in. So once they send in their username and password, they should receive a token. They'll use that token to send further requests. And then we'll also, just as a bonus, have a function for logging out. Oh, right. And a function for actually interacting with the database. So once you're logged in and you click on this get info button, we should be able to see one of the lines inside of our database. So that's our goal. Okay. The first thing we're going to work on is sign up. So we've already got some code in here for running this logic, or at least running this console log when we start up the page and load it into our browser. Now let's add a basic fetch function. So we copy paste, but I'll type it out just so I can talk through it as I do. I don't know how much async was covered in the first part of the curriculum. I don't think you have to worry about it too much. Again, you don't have to worry about figuring out how to write like this custom logic, right? You can use the code that we've provided, and we really just want to have an understanding of what this code does. So async is asynchronous. You don't have to worry too much about what how that works. Basically, this call though will happen asynchronously. And so you'll learn more about it in React. But what this prevents is it prevents this kind of I guess chain reaction of logic waiting for other logic to complete, right? So we write our fetch request, and generally requests are going to be written as asynchronous requests so that other interactions in the application in the front end don't get hung up.
Async gives the ability within that function for us to use the await, right? So response will await the fetch, and once that happens, then you can move on to the next step in that process, right? That's why you want to use async, so you can use the await methods.
Exactly,
Correct?
exactly. Yeah. So now that we've used, now that we've specified this is going to be an asynchronous function, like Sean said, we should be able to use await with our other lines of code. So we're gonna grab a response because that's the goal of this method, right? We're gonna fetch some data. So we're going to create a response variable to await the results of the fetch method. Fetch is built in JavaScript. So if we hover over it, we know that it already exists, right? It's not like something that we're creating that already exists. We're calling this existing function fetch. It accepts a URL and a context. So we'll just specify that we want to accept those two things that are going to be passed in when we call this basic fetch. And then we will create a body variable as well. And this is going to await the response.json. And so this part here is what's going to use JSON to parse through the response in a way that we can interact with in our browser. And so this will just return that body. Now we can write another method called getCredentials. And this is a Lambda function that will send an event to this following logic. So the event is the interaction that the user has in the front end, right? And in that case, it's like typing in your username and password and submitting the input using the submit button. So username equals e.target. Target is basically a built-in function that grabs the target of the event. And in this case, it's going to be the username input. And it's going to grab the password as well. So we're just grabbing the username and password from these two inputs. So let's do an e.target.password value. And then we're going to return those two values. Now we can do our next method. Why is this? Hold on, give me one sec. Why is this? Oh. Oh, wow, this is slow. I wonder if it's the live server thing. It just kind of fixed itself, but it did so after a bit of a delay. All right, so our next method is going to be handle auth. We want to handle that authentication, right? So we've grabbed the credentials from the browser. Now we have to do something with it, okay? So our handle auth method will, first, we're going to use this prevent default, which is another built-in method that prevents the behavior from running as soon as the page loads. Can you use any variable name for E such as, yeah, yes, Megan, we can. We could use event, but we're gonna stick with E just because for consistency, everywhere else in the code that uses that and expects it, we want to, we'll just keep it the same. So we don't spend so much time like going through and editing everything. So e.prevent default, this prevents this code from running, this function specifically, from running as soon as the page loads. And then we want to take in that username, password, or more specifically, this is where we call the get credentials method that we just wrote, right? And that will give us the username and password. Now we're going to create a new variable called checkbox. And this is going to use the built-in query selector method to look for the sign up ID. So again, this symbol, the hash symbol, is what the browser uses. Not so much for refreshing, As soon as we load the page and the DOM is interpreting all of the HTML and all of the associated logic, we don't want the DOM to automatically run this. So that's why we have the e.prevent default. Okay. And right, we use a symbol, right, the hashtag, to look for the exact element. And so if we go back to our HTML and we look for sign up, let me just do a Command F. We see how this input has an ID of sign up, and this label says it's for the sign up. So this query selector is going to basically grab this element. So that's what we're doing. We're using the query selector to point to any element with an ID of sign up. And that's why we use the hash symbol. If it was a class, you would be using period, but we're using IDs. Okay. Now we want to run some conditional logic. So if checkbox is checked, then we call sign up method. Otherwise, we'll just give a warning saying this function doesn't exist yet. Okay. So now we have the ability to sign up users. Well, actually, we're almost there. We have to write the sign up method, right? We call it, but it doesn't exist yet. So we're gonna write one more method called sign up, and it's gonna take that username and password. It's going to format it into this dictionary object. I think in JavaScript dictionaries are just called objects. They're just a little vague, but that's how it is. That's how JavaScript rolls. And we are going to specify a context, right? Because if you remember from earlier, we are passing in a context to our basic fetch. All right. So our context, we're specifying a method, post, we're specifying headers, content, type, application JSON. As a reminder, these are the headers that get attached to the request. And these are the headers that we also specified inside of our middleware, right? So inside of Django, we specified that we wanted a content type application JSON header. And we also specified 4 different methods that we wanted to accept, and post is one of them. Now, let me see. Do I have any typos, or is it just... Oh, that needs to be uname. This shouldn't have a space. Okay, cool. All right. Now we call that basic fetch method that we wrote at the start of this, and we pass in our application, our Django application's URL. In this case, we're running Django on our local machine. So 127.0.0.1 is our local machine. Port 8000 is the port that Django is using. So accounts, sign up. And let's grab just hmm. So that's okay. Actually, I'll do that in a sec. I was gonna grab one of my curl requests to demo um getting something from Django, but I don't think there's anything that we need to grab just yet. So this window's not unload. It's actually going to be at the bottom. I don't think it matters, but let's move to the bottom so we could follow the code inside of the README. And we're going to add to this a form. We're going to use the query selector to grab the form element, or the element with form as its ID. Okay, so let's save all of that and let's see if this works. So if we do grab this address and I open up a new tab and I go to admin, let's see, do I have, I wonder if I already created something. Shoot, I did not. Okay, I thought I created a super user, but I guess not. So what is it? Python -n create super user. Ooh, I need a refresher. If anyone remembers how to create a super user, just go ahead and call it out. Otherwise, I'm going to double check day 3. Or was it somewhere else? The admin thing. Oh, or yeah, manage.py, not -m. Okay, I'm going to make a super user. This is just so I can go into the admin console and so we could see what users we've created, right? So all right, we are inside of our admin console. I don't know why it looks like this. And let's take a look at our users. Okay, so apparently I've already made a bunch of users. So when we walk through this, we'll make sure to avoid using any of these. Okay, so our front end. Now that we've saved some app.js, some code. Well, let me see if I'm missing anything. I'll make sure I'm not missing anything. For sign up, I have context. Yes, I was missing something. Basic fetch requires 2 arguments. So that's the URL, that's the context. I forgot to pass in context. So let me make that correction. I'm going to save. I'm going to refresh one more time. I should be able to sign up as a new user now. So there is going to be some like behind the scenes magic that I'm going to have to use the dev console to show, because the HTML, because one, the HTML doesn't show it in any way. And 2, it's, I think, critical to understanding how all of this works, right? So with my dev console, I'm going to open up this application portion. So you could do the same in yours. And what this does is it gives us access to local storage. Local storage is this cache inside of your browser that stores things like cookies and session data. So in this case, whenever you interact with like an API, right? This is the general flow. You interact with an API from a backend, so you're sending a request. It's going to process that request and send a response. And that response, depending on how the API is built and designed, may be an authentication code or an authorization header, something of that nature. And we'll see here if we create a new user. Oh man, I'm not feeling creative today. What should I name this? Code Platoon. I'm going to create a new user with a new password. We should see. Well, actually, we're not going to see an auth token yet, right? Because if you remember from Thursday, we created two endpoints: get sign up user, and get token. So we're not actually getting a token yet. So sorry, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. We should be able to see the user sign up though. So I'm going to go ahead and sign up this user. Let's see. Nothing here. Let's go back to application. Yep, nothing here either. Let's look at network. Okay, my request went out. That's about all I see so far. So that's fine because we have our Django admin console to confirm whether or not this user was created. So let's refresh. And it doesn't look like it was created. So let's see. I wonder if we're missing anything still. Ah, yes, yes, yes. Very important part of the code that we are missing. We need to be able to submit the form, right? So let's go ahead and add that. I should have noticed earlier too that this is grayed out, wasn't being called. So if you copy and pasted the code, it should have worked for you, but I forgot to type this part, so let me add it. So we are basically writing a Lambda function that takes this event and it will run the handle auth method that we created. Handle auth. And does it take something? Yep, it takes the events. Let's save. Now let's try that again. Refresh. Tune. W. Hit submit. Okay, now we're seeing more activity. Let's go to our application. Okay, cool. Nothing there. Let's refresh this. Shoot, still nothing. Not implemented yet. Okay, so when I hit my handle auth method, it's going to not implemented yet. So if the checkbox, we have to we have to check this checkbox when signing up. Okay. This is why this is why good design is very important for the user experience. Okay. I'm gonna hit submit and hopefully third time is a charm and it works this time. Um, not seeing any activity though, so I wonder. Well, it's no longer sending me that console logs. So let me just also do this. User password submitted. Okay, we refresh. Let's try this again. Okay, it says it submitted it. If we, cool. So we got a 400, we got a bad request, which is good because we shouldn't be able to sign up as a user that already exists, right? So let's double check our auth page and boom, we see our new user, Platoon. So it worked once we finally checked the checkbox. And if we go to our application, just as expected, we don't see anything yet. So we were able to hit the sign up user endpoint that we created last Thursday in our wines.api in our Django project. Now let's write some logic to interact with the get user. I think that's what we named it, the get user endpoint that retrieves or sends the token. Okay, so let's now add some additional HTML. And where do we leave off? We have basic fetch, or sorry, I should have said JavaScript. Let's add some JavaScript. We've got some basic fetch. We've got get credentials. We've got handle auth. We've got sign up. All right, let's add get token. So now we're going to use get token to interact with the account get token endpoint. And it's going to be a very similar format to this request above. We're going to take the username, we're going to take the password, we're going to pass it into this basic fetch that we wrote earlier. This time, all this stays the same actually. Method is going to continue to be post. Headers is going to be content type, application JSON, as opposed to like raw data. And then we need to specify the body. It's going to be a stringified version of our data. Okay. Then we're going to use an await. Notice this time that we're using an await on the basic fetch because we need to retrieve something, right? So we want to be able to pass in what we grabbed from this fetch, and we want to return that. So I'm going to add my 127.0.0.1:8000 accounts / get token. My second argument is the context. Now we can return the body. And let's see, let's fix some things like the async that I am missing. So I got to add this line because I missed this line. And I also have to specify async, right? Because I didn't do that either. So async, username, name, password, ready. Okay, now this looks good. I'm going to save. I should be able to get these credentials. Okay. Nothing else changes. Everything else stays the same. And if we go back here, wondering if it wants me to just try to sign in. I feel like that should be for the next part, but let's see what happens if we do this. I think I might have to sign up as a new user actually, but let's just see what happens. Yeah, nothing is happening yet. I'm having something yet. No form. Let's submit. Oh, because I forgot to check the checkbox again. Whoops. All right, so let's go back to, I'm going to sign up as a new user. So Platoon 2, I'm going to make sure I check my sign up box. I am going to hit submit. I see that my user password did submit. And let's see if it actually returned the token this time. Not yet. And why is that?
Is that because the handle authorization? Yeah, you didn't, it's not in there. Look at your handle auth. If you go up the method, right? For handle auth. Look how it says else,
Yeah, I see.
right? So it doesn't need to have the get token in there, so it will return one instead of just console.log not implemented yet.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So let's double check our, yep, this is where we were supposed to update the else statement. So like I mentioned earlier, when you're interacting with an API and it's sending you a response, it will generally send it to your local storage. So that's where we want to set our token once we've retrieved it from the back end. So let's do a const token await get token. So now we're actually using that method that we wrote. So now do a local storage, set item, specify it as a token, or we're going to store it as a token. And this needs to be async as well. Okay. We need to make sure that's spelled correctly. Cool. Saving, refreshing. Let's try this again. I think if this user exists, they should be able to sign in. I'm going to try the first user, actually. I'm going to hit submit, and boom. We see inside of our dev console, inside of our application tab and our local storage, our token. So now we have confirmed that we can access both endpoints, the sign up user and get token endpoints that we created last Thursday. Okay, well, now that you have the token, you should be able to use that token for additional requests, right? So let's now add some logic to actually grab some wine. Okay, and let's maybe speed through this part. This is a lot of typing, so a lot of room for error. Let's just talk through it. We're going to be creating a create wine HTML constant. It's going to accept a wine object and an element type, in this case, an H3. So it's going to create a new element, a new header, and it's going to store it under the name variable. This name element will have a text using the wine name we grabbed from the wine object. It's then also going to show the price as a header for a variety, I guess, as a header for. I don't know anything about wines. and a description also under as a header for. And once we write out these variables, we loop through every element and we append that to the H3 element. So everything is going to become a child of this H3 element. So that means in the HTML, when we're writing HTML, the parent-child relationship is basically anything nested inside something else is a child element of that. This input, this label, these are children of this div. Okay, next we are going to write a method that will use a query selector to grab the get info element. And if there is a response, we call this create line HTML function, right? So basically this will only run when we interact with the get info button. And if we're not signed in, it will tell us to sign in. Okay. And did anything else change? I don't think so. Oh, yes, this is also new. We're going to add a fetch results. And this is where we take the token that we've stored inside a local storage and we hit a new endpoint, the wines endpoint with a value of 1 so that we can get the first line in the wine table. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to copy paste these two because they are basically fairly simple compared to that more important fetch that we are adding. So let me add this to my HTML. Save. I'm going to add this C. And below my other API methods, I'm going to add this new one. So const fetch results, got to be async. We specify the token, which we grab from local storage. Get item, token. And we specify a context again. Okay, so yeah, I'm typing this out as opposed to the other code because this is really the more important part of today's lesson, right? These are the methods that are actually interacting with the middleware that we set up inside of our Django application. And this syntax that we're following over and over and over again is the syntax that matches what was inside of our settings.py. So if we go to, or not our settings.py, sorry, our middleware. So right, if we go back to our middleware, we will see the content type, the methods that we are allowing, and that is essentially what's happening in the front end. We are using certain methods. If they are not inside of this list, then they will be rejected. And in this case, we want to pass in content type of application JSON, just like all the other ones. But we also have to pass in one more thing in the headers this time, and that's going to be the authorization token, or the authorization header that includes the token. Let's use some string concatenation or interpolation to grab that token value. And then let's also add our return. 7.0.0.1 8,000, and we are now hitting the wines endpoints, and we are passing in a value of 1. In a more robust front-end application, you would probably add functionality so that you're not hard coding a 1 to the end, but you're actually passing in the ID that the user specifies, but one step at a time. Let's save that. Let's go ahead and refresh. We've got our token. This should still work. So I'm going to copy this value. And actually, no, I don't need to do that because it's just going to grab it. Our token's going to be grabbed from local storage. So if I sign in with my Platoon user again, and I submit, let's see. Okay, I'm missing something again. Let's just double check that. Did that get changed? Nope, that still stays the same. Am I calling the wrong function somewhere? I probably am. Oh, down here. So yeah, we have to add to our onload method. So we've got the onSubmit. Now we have to add some functionality for get info. That's document.query selector, get info. And when we click on get info, we want to be able to call fetch results and pass in those results to our write wine API results method. Double check everything else. So this time on Windows onload, it's going to submit an event to handle auth. If the event that we interact with is on submit, or sorry, whatever element, yeah, the form element. And now when we interact with a get info element, we should be able to retrieve the results. Okay, so save, refresh, Platoon, W. Oh, am I only signed in because it says log out? I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Okay, now. It cannot set properties null. So in line 97 of my app, I'm still, yikes, still missing something. Oh, hashtag. Seeing the hashtag in the selector. Hmm.
You have to reload it because it's saying not implemented yet. Oh, yeah, that's right. You left it in there. Never mind.
It's I shouldn't have clicked on submit. I'm already logged in. The not implemented is because I forgot to check the box, and I should have been interacting with the with the get info button. So again, this is just very very unclear user experience with some very poorly designed HTML, but it gets the job done because we are able to confirm that we can interact with that final endpoint. Wines and retrieve the first line in the table. And if I hit save and I hit info, I can also get the second um, value. Can anyone tell me why I don't have to sign in again?
Is it because the token's stored on your local machine? I just don't know how it's reaching out and getting that already.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Um, so this part of the logic, where is it? Local storage. When we call handle auth, and this should be commented out now, and we successfully sign in, and yeah, it's going to set the item into local storage, and local storage is built in, right? So like this is a reserved keyword and that acts as the storage class. So like it's already built in. Like we don't have to like really do anything else but call a method that it has, right? So this local storage dot set item method will take whatever is sent back to us from another request, right? In this case, when we hit the submit button with our username and password, it's going to call get credentials and it's going to pass in the username and password. And if the checkbox is not checked, it's going to run this logic and we're going to call the get token method instead with a username and password. And if our request succeeds, then it's going to return a response. That response is going to have the token because we are specifying we want to return that token. And then we store it into local storage using this method, set item from the storage class. Okay. So yeah, that's about it. Uh, oh, right. I guess there's also like some functionality for removing the item. Do you all want me to run through that, or do you think you all got the gist of it and you could play around with it yourself? I just want to make sure you all have enough time for the challenge. Okay. All right. I'm going to open up breakout rooms and we're going to meet back here at 1 o'clock. So after lunch, we're going to switch gears and we are going to run through some AWS deployments. Sound good? Cool.